How's it going, Chicago? Nice crowd.
Look at this. Oh, no, I can't see them. There's a lot of people here.
There are a lot of people here. This is really nice. I was very curious, who got vaccinated and who would come out.
Right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. This is exciting. Let's start off by saying congratulations to this guy, to Kal Penn. His book came out on Tuesday.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm curious, who here has already read the book?
Oh, wow, yeah.
All right, good.
I hear it's a quicker read than I thought it was going to be.
Well, I apologize in advance to the rest of you for the spoilers, which are inevitably going to be coming up tonight. But it's a fantastic book.
Thank you.
I laughed and I cried. I did.
Did you?
Twice.
Oh, wow. I want to know where. You don't have to tell me in front of 500 people, but I do want to know where you cried.
And then, it was like an incredible journey, and I'm really excited to talk to you about it tonight. So, look, it came out on Tuesday, got a lot of press, rave reviews, and a lot of media talking about the fact that you came out.
Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, it kind of felt like it overshadowed the book coming out, and I want to know like how you felt about that.
I mean, look, if you're gonna, the mistake I made was trusting a white woman at People magazine to write a full breadth profile. I was like, you'll write a whole profile about how I'm a man of color who, struggled in Hollywood and triumphed and worked for the first black president? She's like, yes. Tell me about Josh. I was like, oh God. No, look, I'm obviously very happy to share the story that I share about my relationship with Josh and how we met in DC over NASCAR and a love of camping, which all my friends think is a hilarious story because if they know us obviously and we're total polar opposites. But I was definitely sort of like the first profile we did on the book. It launched on CBS Sunday Morning, and they said we really want you're sharing a lot of personal stories about your journey. We want to include people in your life in our profile, which is what they do on that show. And they said, can we do the interview at your parents' house in New Jersey with your parents? And I was like, well, let me ask. Asked my parents, and they're like, no, we would prefer to, not be in the limelight, which is their whole thing and has always been their whole thing. And then they said, okay, that's fine. Well, will Josh join you for part of the interview? I was like, I don't think he will because he also hates the limelight, but I'll ask. So I was like, would you want to be part of the CBS Sunday Morning interview? And he's like, oh, I would rather die. I'm like, right, yeah, okay. Cool, so that's a no. So my acting teacher, who I write about in the book, said, well, why don't you just do it in our high school acting classroom? And he joined me. He was also a big part of my life. So I'm glad that, obviously very, very happy with all the love and positivity, and I am very, very appreciative, and also appreciative of conversations like this where we can talk about really the full story of the book.
Yeah. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, as I said on the phone yesterday, congratulations on coming out officially. So why now? Why did you write this book at this stage in your life? And I know it was a 5-year process, but you're younger than me, and it reads like a memoir. So this is just like part 1 of your life, right?
Yeah, somebody said like, you can only call it an autobiography if you're old, and like otherwise it can be a memoir. And I'm like, well, that makes sense. I mean, like Mindy Kaling's got 2-3 books out. She's younger than me. Those books are awesome. I decided to the first iteration or the first idea of this book came about because my manager. I've only had one acting manager my whole career, so more than 20 years. I describe him in the book, and I know I have some friends in the audience who have met him. He is truly, his personality is like every character from the HBO show Entourage in one person. So he's got a heart of gold, but he is also a lion. And I've known from the time I was a kid, everyone's always said, oh, you're too nice. So I'm like, all right, so I need to hire a guy like that, because I need somebody to go to bat for me. And the day I left the White House, the day my 2.5-year sabbatical ended, he called when I was still living in D.C., and he said, you need to write a book. And I said, well, I don't, why? He goes, well, there's, nobody has had an acting career and then has gone into politics. And I think I said to him, like, literally the governor's name is Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like, there are people who have done this. And then I also said, I didn't take a sabbatical from acting to do this because I wanted to write a book about it. I did it because I genuinely thought it was the right thing to do for myself at the time. And I didn't think I had a story to tell. And then probably four and a half years after that, there was no real epiphany. I just kind of thought, well, two things. I would like to write a book for the 25-year-old version of me. So the kid who had multiple interests and was trying to navigate a career in a monolith like Hollywood, and didn't really have a series of stories that I could point to when I was that age. And then also for this set of people, of which there are quite a few, who don't view the world as binary, don't view the world as through the lens of mutually exclusive choices. And especially, I think, during the pandemic, a lot of people said, do I want to quit this job that I have? Do I want to take on some new passion or interest, or that thing that everybody always said was crazy? And I thought maybe through my ridiculous journey, there are stories that I can tell that might appeal to some people, or that might make people laugh or cry twice, apparently. So I thought maybe I'll put it together.
Yeah. I was feeling feelings. So speaking of navigating Hollywood, when you went out to UCLA to do your undergrad and you were trying to break into Hollywood, I think I was surprised by how much identity and skin color, and the challenges of being brown came up in the story. And then, but by the end I wasn't surprised at all. It made complete sense when I read your whole journey. But you were kind of a lone wolf at the time. You were like, now you feel like a pioneer or a trailblazer. We were talking about this just before. On my flight in today, on United, they have Hemispheres magazine, and on the top, it was like a Q&A with Kumail Nanjiani, and then there's like Riz Ahmed, Hassan Minhaj, Mindy Kaling, Priyanka Chopra, so how do you feel about the kind of progress that's being made in Hollywood and the systemic kind of challenges and racism that you've been, fighting and dealing with your entire career? Is enough progress being made?
Yeah, that's such a great question. It's one that when I think about all of what you just said, it's with such a celebratory mindset. And the reason that I talk very specifically about racism in the industry in the book and share specific projects. I don't name names on purpose, by the way, because I think it's more fun to call a producer Captain Moneybags, because that's how he felt to me rather than use his name, but also because the book is about how systems can and do change. And I love what I do as an actor, and I want the industry I love to continue to evolve. When I started out, there were other South Asian actors who were a generation above me, whose names we may never know because there was such a lack of opportunity. And I think the folks whose names we do know, like Sarita Chaudhary or Ajay Naidu, for every Sarita and Ajay, there were scores of folks who are still, by the way, working in theater predominantly and working.
Still doing his thing, Ajay.
What's that?
He's still doing his thing.
Absolutely, yeah. And others like him. And then that generation just below me, so couple of years below me, like the Kumails and the Mindys, it's amazing, I think, especially because everybody had a different story on how they got there. When I started out, even for the stereotypical roles, there were, I talk about this there's a movie I did called Van Wilder with Ryan Reynolds and Tara Reid. Thank you. That's how you know the crowd is split between people who enjoyed the movie and people who were like, is he going to deconstruct Van Wilder? I'm like, I do in the book, and both are true, by the way. Ryan Reynolds, Tara Reid, fantastic. The writers were great. I felt very supported in doing that movie. But also, the name of the character I played was Taj Mahal, so it is problematic in its own right. But I
just embracing the stereotypes.
Yeah. Well, when I got the phone call for that movie, by the way, it took me about 3.5 years, give or take, to get an agent. And I remember knowing why I wasn't getting an agent, because after the first 2 years, my friend Jenna Von Oy, who's a wonderful actor, she was on Blossom. She played Six on Blossom when we were kids, and then was on a show called The Parkers after that. She had a really A-list manager while we were in college, and she said, I know that all the other UCLA theater students, many of them, it's very easy for them to get agents because it's one of the top 3 theater and film schools in the world. Why don't I take your tape, your audition tape and your photos and everything to my manager, at least he'll meet with you and you can talk about what it is in the tapes that might not be resonating with people. And I said, wow, you would do that for me. That's amazing. She called me back about 2 weeks later and she said, so he doesn't want to meet with you, but how candid do you want me to be? And I was like, tell me everything, because I want to know what I should be doing differently to get somebody to notice me. And she said, okay, so first of all, he said that you're very good. He was very impressed by your audition tape. And he doesn't just say that, so I know that he's being truthful. I was like, that's great. I feel like there's a huge but coming up. And she said, but yes, he said that the reason that he doesn't want to meet with you is he doesn't think that somebody who looks like you is ever going to work consistently enough in Hollywood for it to be worth his while. And agents and managers make a commission off of their clients, so that was why he didn't want to meet with me. And I was, very thankful for her candor and for his, I guess. But I also was confused about what I was supposed to do, because there was nothing I could do differently in those audition tapes, right? That was just my barrier to entry. So when I finally got an agent and started going out for parts, and she called to tell me about Van Wilder, she called and said, honey, there's a great part for you. It's a supporting lead in a teen movie with Tara Reid, who just did American Pie, and Ryan Reynolds, who's on a sitcom called Two Guys, a Girl, and a Pizza Place. And I'm going to come to my office so that you can pick up the script and I'll talk to you about it. And I said, well, email me the script. Tell me the name of the character. I'm super excited to dive in. And that went back and forth. She kept saying, come to my office. I kept saying, email me the script and tell me the name of the character. And finally she said, do you promise you'll come to the office? I said, yes, just email me the script. What's the name of the character? She said, okay, I'm emailing you right now. The name of the character is Taj Mahal. And I hung up on her. And she called me back. She's like, I knew you were going to hang up. I'm like, well, yeah, I'm obviously not playing a guy named Taj Mahal. That's not what I'm doing. And we had a very long conversation about, excuse me, if I did book the part, what that would mean in terms of eliminating one barrier to entry, right? That it would be undeniable that there would be a credit on my resume. And that story is much longer than just that. But the kicker to that was, after agonizing over whether I even wanted to audition for it, the last round audition I knew was going to be between me and another guy. And I was trying to figure out who the other brown actor would be, because we sort of would see each other at auditions and there was no shortage of us.
Like I said, you were a lone wolf back then.
It was, not exactly a lone wolf, right. but there were undeniably fewer of us. Right. So I walk into the audition room and the other guy's already there, and I sign in and I look at him and it's a white dude in brown face. And so I was, and that was, by the way, really, like, the awe. I understand why that's shocking in 2021, but A, it still happens. Look at the Aladdin movie and all the extras that they painted. And B, like, that was just the way it was. So I was actually more impressed. I was like, did this homie, did he put the makeup on at home and drive here? Do you go to the bathroom downstairs? Do you apply it in the car? If he did drive here, does that increase his chances of getting pulled over? Like, how does that work when you're a white actor who puts on brown face? But it also decided for me that all of the concerns that I had about whether I would want to play a role like that, those evaporated, because I instantaneously was like, you're not allowed to have this part. You can get a credit on anything else that you want. You're not allowed to have this part. I want it for my resume. So to your point about now, why talk about those stories in the book? Because I love how much things have changed, and I think there's so much more work to be done, but especially with the streamers and all the work that Hassan and Mindy and people who are writing are able to accomplish, it's awesome, and I'm so happy.
And what kept you going when you were dealing with situations like that, or agents telling you, well, I don't want to represent you because I won't be able to, you're not going to book any gigs?
I think I still loved the idea that that as an artist or as an actor, that you could tell stories that bring people together or that change hearts and minds. And I knew the reality is, for any actor, you always have to start out doing these bit parts that are not necessarily artistically fulfilling. But in the case of any performer of color, especially back then, the adage of, like, you're always going to be too tall, too short, too fat, or too skinny for a casting director. Well, if you're a performer of color, you're also just too ethnic. And so you don't have the luxury of being too tall, too fat, too short, too skinny. So I always knew that I wanted to tell stories for the purpose of being able to feel those emotions, tell those stories, bring people together. I thought a lot about Mira Nair's Mississippi Masala, which turned 30 this year. I saw that movie when I was a little kid, and it was the first time that I saw people who looked like us, who weren't cartoon characters or stereotypes. And not that something like an accent or a job is in itself a stereotype, but generally those are racial signifiers that are reductionist towards a particular.
We weren't eating monkey brains.
We were not. Yeah, I don't. That was not my dinner.
So, I want to continue to talk about some of the challenges you faced, and let's talk about family, and aunties are a kind of running theme through the book.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, they have to be.
They have to be. and look, it really resonated with me. I felt like you were telling my story in large parts, and the breaking out of the mold. You're not going to become a doctor. You're not going to become an engineer when you have a family of, like superstar doctors in your family, and your parents are scientists and engineers, and you're failing statistics, and I failed statistics, and so there's like a lot that
we're very disappointing, Suroosh.
So this is the question, like there are aunties who are like, you're not smart enough to go to med school at Yale, and like, like judging you, and you're the outlier, you're the freak who's studying acting, you're such a disappointment. When you started getting some success, when you were in Van Wilder, let's say, or Harold and Kumar, go to White Castle, at what point, shout out to Harold and Kumar, we got a fan in the back. At what point did the aunties say, Kal, we're so proud of you. We knew you could do it. We believed in you the whole time.
I'm actually super curious what your experience has been with this also, especially given your path. In my case, yes. The context for this is that for folks who don't know, the reason that there's so many brown and yellow doctors of a particular generation is that post-1965, there was a labor shortage in the United States in fields like engineering and medicine. And so there weren't enough American-born folks entering these professions, so they changed immigration laws. I'm paraphrasing a lot here, by the way, but changed immigration laws to allow people who were studying those fields to come to America. So my dad especially was able to come to America to study engineering in grad school because of this. And so that whole generation of folks their kids obviously were encouraged or pressured to go into the same fields that our parents knew as that's the American dream, that's stability, that's how you can put a roof over your head and have this better life that brought us to America. So I think as a kid, when I was even just shitty at math, that's how could you possibly be bad at math? We have master's degrees in engineering and chemistry. Yeah. And so to your point, we would hear a lot of are you, not from my parents, but for non-Desi folks, the contingent of aunties and uncles in your life, the beautiful thing about it is that you have, or at least theoretically the beautiful thing about it is you have a lot of love and support from this big extended family of people who you may not even be blood relatives. The flip side to that is it can feel very gossipy, right? There's a whole community of people who are always talking about you. And I think there were 2 or 3 different moments where I knew that maybe they felt differently about the things that I was doing career-wise. One was after Van Wilder came out, there was an uncle. Are there Gujus in the house? Okay, I'm gonna say
a lot of Gujus in the house.
I'm gonna say what the uncle said in Gujarati first because there is no direct translation. But there's, Van Wilder's, it's an R-rated teen comedy, and for all of the stereotypes of my character, he is just an 18-year-old kid who wants to get laid. So one of the big reasons I decided to take the part was, absent that character from the script, the plot wouldn't have advanced, and that's generally one of the benchmarks of whether a character is merely a stereotype or whether there are redeeming qualities that are integral to the piece itself. So anyway, his goal is to get laid, and towards the end of the movie, there are all these he's half naked and climbs on top of a naked woman and lights his back on fire, and it all goes horribly wrong. So one of the uncles at a family party pulls me aside, and he says he saw Van Wilder, and then he lowers his voice and he says, "Te olhu par chardine." Like, you climbed on top of that woman. And I was like, oh shit, all right, uncle. Okay, so I don't know that that's what I want to point to, and why do I love the arts, and why do I love what I do as an actor? But if that's like the little, like, pretty misogynistic approach that you're taking to why you're okay with me having a career, I'm like, I'll let you open the door a little bit because you're taking the pressure off of why didn't you go to medical school. But then following that were also just many other kind of things where they would say, hey, we saw you on this commercial or we saw you on this thing. And what I took from that was certainly I did think, if I were a successful theater actor, I don't think I would have gotten that kind of like, hey, we saw you on that thing. But then there was also a part of it that I realized, especially through writing this book, I called so many of the aunties and uncles and spoke to my parents so much and figured out that it was never an issue of shame. Not to give away the ending, but I called my parents in particular and said, hey, how embarrassed were you during all those years when I wanted to be an actor and I was trying to be, and all your friends' kids were being doctors? And they said, we were never embarrassed. How did you get that into your head? We were scared. We just didn't think, when we came to America, we didn't know that was a career that somebody could actually have. And so when we slowly figured that out and our friends figured that out, we tried to be very supportive, but we just genuinely didn't know that that's something that somebody could do. So I discovering that as an adult, when you're writing feelings that you felt when you were 22, it's all angst. It's all like, fuck this auntie. Yeah. I remember that. But then to put that in context was very interesting for me. And I'm curious, what was your experience with that?
I'm still harboring resentments.
Are you? Yeah. It's hard, right?
I'm not
as
gracious as you were. You acknowledged in your thank yous at the end the aunties and uncles out there, and it is hard. And my experience was, similar in a way. But it's like as soon as you get some recognition or some, I went from being just like, I don't want to make this about me because this is conversations about you, but I'm going to make it about me for a minute.
I've admired you for a very long time, and these are also the types of questions that we've obviously hung out in the past, but like over a beer, I'm not going to be like, so what was your experience like with aunties, right? So I am curious.
So I was, for those that don't know, like my company Vice started off as like a pretty like out there punk zine, and so when they would see that, they would, be like, deeply concerned, I would say. Yeah. And, so I think that I was a freak. I was just kind of an outlier, and I didn't compute. Mm-hmm. It didn't register what I was doing in any way. But as soon as we got some recognition, as soon as we got some investment, as soon as money came into the picture, all of a sudden, come in for a hug. Yeah. We're so proud of you, and to that I want to say you were fucking haters. But you've actually, your insight in the book about what your parents actually felt actually like was really I don't know, that hit me as well. It was like, shit, my parents probably were feeling a lot of fear. Yeah.
The fear was not something that I, as an American-born kid, ever thought that they might feel. It's very naive to think about that now, but it just never crossed my mind. And to be fair, I think the part of, we talked earlier about how much change has taken place in the entertainment industry. I do always kind of point to the South Asian community as one of the reasons that things haven't progressed fast enough. Because obviously it's very easy to point to the people who don brown face at auditions and all of the barriers to entry. But when the community doesn't support artists from the inside, it also sort of hinders the opportunities that folks have. So I'm glad that that's also changed a lot.
Yeah, I think it helps to have people like yourself and the others that we mentioned before, as for the next generation of, Asians, South Asians, like who are having those hard conversations at the dinner table with their parents and saying, yeah, but look what Kal Penn did. He made this movie and then he worked at the White House, So you were, blazing trails there, which is great.
Thank you.
So in the book, we were saying there's a lot of conversation about identity. It starts with that, it kind of ends with that, but there's this chunk in the middle, the White House years. Yeah. And you're like, I can't remember how you described it, as this futuristic kind of utopian ideal of hiring the brightest minds, regardless of, race and sexual orientation, mm-hmm. and that was like a nice reprieve from talking about identity, which is incredibly important, especially right now. But your path to the White House was also fascinating to me. I didn't know in detail what you did to get there. And you also left Hollywood at a time when, like, you were on House MD, which was on fire. You worked so hard to get to that point. It was very bold. So let's talk about that.
Sure.
How, much trepidation did you have when you made the decision to leave Hollywood and take a sabbatical and go work and do public service and serve your country?
Yeah, it's a good question that it's funny when I think about it as people describe, understandably, that context, because at the time it was just sort of, oh, I'm doing this thing. And I had, the backstory, I guess, is I never was a fan of politics, but the sort of family values in our house were always, you register to vote when you turn 18, you do the right thing. Our grandparents marched with Gandhi in the Indian independence movement, so the stories we would hear at the dinner table were phenomenally secular, always based on togetherness and showing up for other people. Like by 2021 standards, it's like check your privilege was the catchphrase in our household that our grandparents taught us without saying that. And at 8 years old, by the way, I also remember the stories that my grandmother would tell me to coerce me into eating my vegetables were like what it was like being beaten and jailed by British soldiers. And so at 8, I so vividly remember just being like, ugh, here she goes again, another story about Gandhi. The sooner I eat these vegetables, the sooner I don't have to hear about that. And then, of course, by the time 6th grade and middle school and high school hit, and Gandhi shows up in it, by the way, a very small section in our history textbooks in the context of Dr. King and nonviolent civil disobedience, then I was like, whoa, hold on a second. This makes sense. This is why you've encouraged us to always make our voices heard. But it was always separate from, I'd never heard anyone in our house say, we're going to go to a political fundraiser, or we're going to go to a rally for a politician. And so while I was on House, Olivia Wilde, who's wonderful, knocked on my dressing room door, and she said she had a +1 to a Barack Obama campaign event where he was going to recruit artists to help him in Iowa campaign. And she's like, do you want to come? And I was like, no, I'm good. And she said, really? I saw that you were reading his book a couple months ago on set. And I was like, yeah, it was a good book. No desire to help him run for president. And she's like, it's an open bar. And I was like, that is tempting, but we can just grab drinks before that, and then you can go to your event. Finally, I said yes, I'd go with her. And there's obviously a longer version of this story that's in the book, but when I knew that it was going to be a room full of artists. It was a small event, maybe 50 people. This was October of 2007, so he was most recently, I think that summer, he was 30 points down in the polls pre-Iowa caucus. Hillary Clinton, John Edwards were beating him by wide margins. And I thought, all right, if Olivia's bringing me to an arts event, I know everyone's going to ask questions about arts education and the National Endowment budgets, but I'm going to ask a smarty pants question. So I went on the Obama website, and I was reading about climate change and all these policy papers, and I read about how the then senator was going to invest heavily in corn-based ethanol. And I was like, well, all right, yeah, ethanol, all right. I remembered this article that I had read a few months prior. This is going to show you what a huge nerd I am, in a magazine called Foreign Affairs that the Council on Foreign Relations publishes every couple of months. And that article said that investing in corn-based ethanol will drive up the price of corn for people who rely on it for food in developing countries. So I was like, well, here's my brilliant question, because Obama's plan is obviously very flawed. So I was like, that's the question I'm going to ask. So we go to this event. I'm standing next to Olivia. Obama's making the rounds. Everyone's asking the very nice questions that I thought they'd ask. He comes over to where we're standing, and he was making small talk. And I said, Senator, I actually have a question about climate change. And he was like, oh, okay. And I said, I read your policy paper about investing in ethanol, and isn't that just going to drive up the price of corn for people in developing countries? And he goes, oh, yeah, I read that article in Foreign Affairs too. If you read my plan carefully, you would have seen that I'm investing in corn-based ethanol as a bridge to cellulosic ethanol so that you can make fuel one day from things like your grass clippings and raking the leaves in your yard. And he smiles and he walks over to the next person. And Olivia is just like, you just got schooled by Barack Obama. And we both signed up to volunteer for the campaign that night. Because I don't know at what point, like, the hubris of being a young actor who had 2 glasses of wine, where I was like, I'm going to know more than a guy sitting on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. But, you know, so we signed up to volunteer, and we go to Iowa for what was supposed to be a weekend, and I just met the most incredible people I had ever met. To your point about it being incredibly diverse, you know, there were people who were from all walks, still, by the way, to this day, from the Iowa campaign on through the end of the 8 years of the Obama White House, the by far the most diverse place I've ever worked or had friends who have worked, and now it's obviously like a family after all that time. But you know, it was diverse, and not just diverse in the check the box diversity, right? I talk about this in the book, where there was a guy named Rohan Patel who was in charge of rural outreach for Obama in Iowa. Now, Iowa was, you know, it's what, 98% white. So your poli-sci textbook will say, if you're a black candidate down 30 points in the polls, maybe don't hire the brown guy to do your farmer outreach. But that wasn't the approach. The approach was, this guy's really good at his job. Same thing with, I think both our military and LGBT outreach were handled by a Marine out of the Des Moines office. And it was just the idea of, I guess, again, by 2021 standards, we call that intersectionality, but that's what it was in practice before people were throwing around that word. So I was really inspired. I ended up staying for longer than the weekend. Screenwriters went on strike in Hollywood that year, so I had a little bit more downtime, and I ended up going to 26 states on behalf of the Obama campaign, and just, you know, segueing that into a job.
Well, so that part of the book was absolutely gripping, and it's a much longer story. And,
yeah, it is.
And I think you'll have to buy the book to read the story, to get the whole thing, because it's incredible. But, you know, then you get to the White House, and you get the gig there, and sounds like a very, very big job that you had. And so what I want to know is, like, can you tell us some kind of behind the scenes stuff?
Sure.
You know, like were people hooking up with each other?
Oh, of course.
And then like,
absolutely.
Was it weird in meetings after that? You know, like.
I mean, nobody, as far as I know, nobody was like banging after the meetings themselves. But
oh, but you know, like, you're working 18 hours a day.
Yeah,
and things happen.
Sure. Like any high stress office environment. Truly, of course, there would have been office romances. There would have been people who have beef with each other. But I think that to me, really, the remarkable thing was I was. The vast majority of people I was working with, especially in the Office of Public Engagement, which is where I worked, almost everybody, almost everybody had taken a leave of absence from something else that they could have been doing too. And almost nobody who was in that office initially worked on the Obama campaign because they thought they were going to work at the White House. They did it because they thought it was the right thing for them to do, or the unique opportunity to make things better. So the sort of inside of it is, I know that I got a lot, and still continue to get a lot of questions like, wow, you took this leave of absence to work in government. But the truth was, thousands of other people were doing the exact same thing. And so I was in the company of really inspiring people who had taken leaves from law firms, or, you know, we had a pediatrician on our staff, or clean energy companies. There was no shortage of people to look to and say, wow, this is incredible. I can't believe that I get to be a small part of this. And I was a junior mid-level staffer, so the things that we were all handed to do were keep your head down, do good work. One of the first things that I worked on, which I tell the story in the book, is an executive order to reestablish something called the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. So the three sort of jobs that I had were, I was the President's liaison to Young Americans, the President's liaison to Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and then the liaison to the arts community. And in my role as the Asian American outreach person, I helped oversee this massive executive order that touched on different federal agencies. And I started in June of 2009 because I was still on House at the time. So I started later than the administration. So I think it was my second day at work. My boss, Tina Chen, who's wonderful friend, incredible. I think
shout
is
out
here
to Tina
today.
Chen.
Huge shout out to her and to Valerie Jarrett. And I know everyone's it's Chicago, so y'all know everybody, and they're wonderful, and you know them well even before they worked in the White House. But I remember she handed me this folder, and said, there were a couple other people who had been handling this portfolio, just familiarize yourself with it. There's a conference call tomorrow about these 26 different federal agencies and whether one in particular should be part of the executive order. And I said, okay, cool. So it's like, so you're gonna, you need to be on that conference call. So I take home this big binder, and I knew most of the information from the campaign because I'd worked on this kind of stuff for that year and a half prior. So I go into the office, and I'm like, I'm taking notes as we get on this conference call, 10 a.m., everyone's discussing. In the book, I tell the story, and I refer to the agency that we're talking about as the Department of Hot Dogs, just because it sounds more fun than talking about which federal agency should or shouldn't have been part of the president's executive order. So we're on this call about the Department of Hot Dogs, and people are really debating whether it would be helpful to the Asian American Pacific Islander community and the president in governance to include that agency. And as I'm taking notes, the call wraps up, and it's 10:50. And everyone goes, great, so what's the decision? And I'm like ready to write down the decision to share with Tina and Valerie. And like the line goes quiet, and someone goes, well, come on guys, what's the decision? Like I have a meeting at 11. Someone else goes, well, who's on from the White House? And I'm like still ready to take notes. And I just like took myself off mute. I'm like, hey, yeah, this is Kal. And the person goes, yeah, all right, Kal, so what's the decision? And I just remember feeling overwhelmingly like, surely there is an adult on the phone somewhere. And that adult is going to make this call. And without missing a beat, I said, I think the president would find it wasteful for that agency to be part of the executive order. I don't think we need it. Thank you all so much for your insight. Everybody said thank you, hopped off the phone, and I fucking ran through the halls of the White House to Tina Chen's office, up 3 flights of stairs. Her wonderful assistant ushered me in, and she, without missing a beat, she was typing an email, and I said, I'm out of breath. I was like, I just got off that phone call, and I said that agency can't be part of the president's executive order. And I'm like standing over here, and she's at her desk, and she just goes, yeah, that's why we hired you. And I was like, yeah, no, I know. I just figured I'd let you know how the call went, like just wanted to make sure that you knew. And before I left, she did look up and she just goes, next time you can just send me an email. I was like, yeah, no, for sure, I'll definitely do that. So it was like I think that I tell that story in the book. Obviously, it's self-deprecating, but I think it was the idea that if you're like a West Wing fan or a fan of a lot of these shows, you view politics sort of like the way I think a lot of people view Hollywood. It's this monolith where the people who work there are like up here and they possess a skill that a lot of us don't have. And what I found was actually the contrary, that you work for somebody who was an underdog through this long presidential campaign, really wanted to do something very different. And the people who he hired were people who would help execute that mission and really knew, you were trusted to do your job. And so any insecurities that we had about why we might have been hired, and I asked Valerie this point blank, I said, I just want to make sure that I'm not being hired in any way because I'm also an actor. And she just, in true Valerie Jarrett fashion, said, I can assure you that I am hiring you in spite of it. And I was like, all right, cool, thank you. So there are plenty of those stories that I share in the book, some self-deprecating and some not so self-deprecating.
I mean, that's a fantastic story, Kal, but I was hoping for a little more.
Oh, sure. What do you? There are a bunch that I tell. Are you talking about the national security email that I write about? I'll drop two stories.
No. I was hoping for things that weren't in the book.
Oh.
But,
Okay.
I think we should probably have one more story about White House, and then we'll keep moving on.
Okay.
Because there's just so much to talk about.
Yeah.
But I did love the story of. So it seemed like you guys worked your asses off. It was like work hard, play hard.
Yeah.
Right? And the Haiti earthquake happened in which year?
Yeah, Haiti earthquake was 2010, 2011.
Right. So
yeah.
Brutal.
Yeah.
Event, obviously, but natural disaster, but hundreds of thousands of people dead and injured, and
yes.
You guys had to deal with it all hands on deck, right? And you tell the story of like at the end of the week, you were like, okay, this is everything we can do. You had to make a pitch. You worked on, so you kind of also talk a little bit about how you separated your Hollywood life that existed before to your government life.
Right.
But in this one situation, the best way to deal with Haiti was to raise money,
Right.
not send heels to Haiti as the fashion world wanted to do.
Yes, that's a real story.
They actually
by the
did
way.
want to do that.
Somebody called me and said, I want to. I have an idea, like for a thing that we can do to like help people in Haiti. And I'm like, oh, okay, yes. Like so, like how like we have all these heels. I'm like, well, sure, okay. And like you wear them once, and like you don't wear them again. Like we should send them to Haiti. It can be called Heels for Haiti. I'm like, I want to jump off a bridge right now. Not the bridge to cellulosic ethanol, but a real bridge. So there were a lot of those things. I mean, to your point, I didn't do my role as a staffer was decidedly not to engage with Hollywood folks. I mean, to the extent that my arts work touched on that, it was just one small part. I mean, most of the arts work even was about small arts organizations around the country or arts education, something called the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities that had a pilot program for underperforming schools, things like that. So when the Haiti earthquake happened, yeah, it was the all hands on deck thing was like, if you have an idea or an approach that's outside of your lane as a staffer, outside of your portfolio, you're encouraged to share them because that's how bad things are down there.
And you used to have this other lane called Hollywood,
right?
Which you then leveraged. Right?
I did. So the earthquake was about a week or week and a half before the Golden Globe Awards, and having been there when the House cast got nominated, I just said, all of these actors and nominees are going to do red carpet interviews, and they're all going to get asked, the biggest news stories about Haiti, and they're all going to get asked about their feelings on it. I said, if we can just give them the simplest of talking points about fundraising, I think that would be helpful. So I drew up a memo and spent days working on it, and it was basically because President Obama was inviting and deputizing Presidents Bush and Clinton that weekend. They were going to come to the White House, I think on a Sunday, Saturday or Sunday. They were going to make a speech in the Rose Garden announcing something called the Bush-Clinton Haiti Fund that would raise money for rehabilitation in Haiti. And so the biggest thing that people could do was to donate, and we were hoping people would donate to that fund. So we set up this series of conference calls and put this memo together and spent late nights at work. Everyone, by the way, was spending nearly 24/7 at work that week. And that, I guess that Friday night or Saturday night, around 10:30, I turned in the final memo to Tina, and I said, are you good? Do you need anything else? And she said, no, and you should get some sleep. Like, it's been a really rough week, and one of the many things we loved about her was she would tell you to go home when you needed some sleep. And I said, do you need anything tomorrow? She said, no, I mean, this memo's good for Valerie. All the presidents are coming in. Like, you just rest tomorrow, and I'll see you Monday. I said, okay. So I go home, and I changed out of my suit, and I met a bunch of other staffers who had also been working nearly 24/7, and we got shit-faced. We did Jello shots at a bar called Million Al's, which sadly no longer exists. It was quite a burning off steam. Probably got home at 2:30 in the morning, ate some frozen pizza, had a little Gatorade, and I got up around 6:15 that morning to use the bathroom. And I'm stumbling, clearly still drunk, stumbling to the bathroom. I noticed that the red light on my BlackBerry's blinking, which is not uncommon, it just means I have some emails. And I'm glancing down at it as I'm stumbling to the bathroom, and there's an email from Valerie that says, can you meet me in the cabinet room at 7:30 with 42 and 43 to brief them on Haiti outreach around the Golden Globes? And I was like, oh my God. Wow. So I threw down my BlackBerry, jumped in the shower, threw on a suit. This is pre-Uber. It's a Sunday. I think it was a Sunday, so there were no cab. Can't just get a cab. The S1 bus that went down 16th Street wasn't working. So I ran the mile and a half to the White House in my dress shoes and my suit, and I go through the front gate. It's 7:35, maybe 7:40. The receptionist, Darren Page, another Chicago local receptionist of the United States, Rotis, as the president called her. She looks at me when I walk through the door of what are you doing? And I must have been sweating. And I showed her the email from Valerie. And I was like, I think I'm supposed to be in the cabinet room with Presidents Bush and Clinton and Obama. And she's looking at this email and looking at me, and she's like, go ahead. So I walk down the hallway between the reception area and the cabinet room, and I recall like a sea of heavily armed men parting. And I also recall Secret Service are wonderful, and they would, when they're on duty, they're always on and laser focused. But on occasion, in the eyes, you could see some of them go like that, which was a hat tip to my movie career, which we would talk about when they were off duty. And so there was a little bit of that, but I was just very, I was focused on doing this impossible quick briefing. I walk into the cabinet room just as the connecting door to the Oval is closing. And I had just missed the three presidents, and instead Doug Band, basically their chiefs of staff, were there with Valerie and a couple of others, and I crushed that briefing. I briefed them on what was going on, and I didn't know whether it was very clear. I thought it was clear by my tardiness that I probably got called in late. Knowing Valerie, I knew that she wouldn't have thrown me under the bus. She probably would have said, "Yeah, we called him in late." But the briefing went well. Everything went fine. The presidents made the remarks. The chiefs of staff knew what we were doing on that outreach component. And it wasn't until putting the events for this book together, I sent Valerie the book. She was kind enough to moderate a conversation we did in New York a couple of days ago. And she goes, "Hey, I want to ask you about Haiti on stage." And I was like, "I don't know if you read that chapter, but I talk about how I was actually pretty drunk when you called me." And she goes, "No, I know. I read it. All these years I was wondering what you did that night." And I said, "So did I, when I came in, did you know that I was hungover?" And she goes, "No, you pulled that off. That was an impeccable briefing. I was just impressed that you guys went out the night before." I was like, "All right, still got it." So I tell that story in the book because it's so ludicrous, but it's also, it's true. It's one of those.
You were the perfect level of drunk at that point. You weren't wasted.
Yeah.
You were sobering up.
Exactly.
You were still on.
I call it the in between state, right? You're not so hungover, which was probably the rest of that afternoon. You can still perform. But there were inevitably, I've spoken to other people who were far higher ranking than me in different departments, and whether it was the Obama administration or anywhere else, in a high pressure job like that, there are inevitably times where you get called in to perform at times where you don't feel like you're in your best state or you weren't expecting to. As a junior staffer, it was very uncommon to get called in for something like that. But I still was proud of myself for pulling it off.
And running a mile and a half in dress shoes is, I've only run in dress shoes once, and it was horrible. One of the worst experiences.
It's terrible.
I've ever had.
Yeah. It was not good.
So, your family has, your grandparents marched with Gandhi. You work in the White House. Do you have political aspirations?
No.
Come on.
I don't. I really don't. I love what we do as actors. I feel like I have yet to make more stoner movies. That said, I'm very passionate about continuing to help out when I can. I helped out Governor Murphy, who's my home state of New Jersey, with a rally right before the election that the president also came to. We had a day of campaigning together. I'd love to continue to help out when I can. I've made no secret of the fact that one of my dream retirement jobs is to segue my private sector arts experience with something in the diplomatic space. There are a lot of ambassadors that have an arts background and work on cultural diplomacy. But if your question is about running for office, I don't see it in the cards.
I'll check in with you in the.
Please do. I don't see it, man. The things that you got to go through, I do not think are in my strong suit. And so one of the things in the book, I was very conscious of, especially that last chapter about Sunnyside, and sort of what Hollywood's like right now. I was mindful of the fact that I probably, as an artist, and the fact that those stories were so recent, have a chip on my shoulder, right? And I think to run for office, you've just got to be able to let stuff roll off of you in a way that, as artists, I don't know how to do. I take things very personally a lot of times, so I don't think I even have that skill set.
So I'm glad you brought up Sunnyside. 2 years in the White House, you go back to Hollywood. It's, from what I could tell, it was a bit of a rude awakening, a reminder of how Hollywood was after being in this amazing kind of bubble of progressive ideals and good vibes.
Yeah, there were two things that kind of, there were a number of things, but one of the first couple of weeks that I was back in acting, so my sabbatical ends, I get a job on How I Met Your Mother for a season, which was wonderful. a lot of fun. And my manager called around that time and he said, "Hey, I'm sending you a script this week for a Denzel Washington movie where you're auditioning for the part of like a pilot or somebody on a flight crew or something. It's an amazing script, so just look out for it. I'll let you know when you're going in to read." And I was like, "Okay, awesome." And like a week or two went by, and I'm like, "Oh, hey, that script never came through." So I called him. I said, "What's the deal with that movie?" He goes, "Oh yeah, they changed their minds. They don't want to audition you." I was like, "Oh man, why?" He said, "Well, they said that they actually already cast a person of color in the film, and they don't want another one." And I was like, "Oh, well, who did they cast?" Because those 2.5 years I was gone, it was like, it's sort of like athletics. When you're out of the game, people are stepping in, and you just want to be mindful of your competition. And he goes, "Oh, no, it's nobody new. It's just, Denzel Washington's in the movie." And I was like, "Hold up. You're telling me that because Denzel Washington is in a movie that they don't want to cast a brown guy in like a smaller role?" And he said, "Yeah, that's what they said." So then I said, "What the fuck is this producer's phone number?" And he's like, "I can't give you the producer's phone number." And I said, "I want to call this person because if the real first black president of the United States had no problem hiring a real brown guy to work for him, maybe like a movie studio shouldn't worry so much about a brown guy playing a pilot." And he understood exactly what I was saying, and he said, "Well, I mean, welcome back to Hollywood." And it was, it was a rude awakening. But I don't. The reason I don't want to focus only on the negative is the Sunnyside story. I had the chance to develop and co-create a show with my writing partner Matt Murray called Sunnyside, which was about a group of. Thank you. Yeah, if you've seen it. It's about a group of immigrants in Sunnyside, Queens, New York City. It was the most diverse cast on network television in the history of network TV, the most diverse writers' room, and undoubtedly would never have had a chance to get a show like that made if Hollywood hadn't changed so much over the last 20 years. But that said,
Yeah, but
the reason that the show underperformed, and that there could have been, to be fair, many reasons why a show underperforms, but it got pulled off the air very quickly after 2 or 3 episodes, despite assurances from the network that they were going to support it, and despite assurances that they know that comedy takes 8, 9 episodes to find its audience. So we were bummed that they decided to pull us off the air. And it wasn't until a couple of weeks after that the advertising industry publication Ad Age ran an article that disaggregated numbers from NBC's ad spend for 2 shows, our show Sunnyside, and then a far less diverse show that was on in the previous time slot, and it was also a new show. And what the Ad Age article mentioned was that the network had spent something like 3,300% more advertising the nearly all-white show than they had spent on our show. And networks use something called the Nielsen ratings to measure the success or failure of a show. And so what was just so clear was that you can't simultaneously use one benchmark of success for 2 shows when the disparity of what you're spending on advertising those shows is 3,300%, right? That is literally systemic racism. You're setting up the people of color show to fail. So I write about it in the book, again, not because I want to do like a woe is me. Like, obviously, I was livid by all of that, and I do get emotional in the chapter. But it's because the successful shows that also happen to be diverse are generally on streaming platforms for a reason. They're not beholden to advertiser dollars in the same way. They're subscription-driven. Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon are crushing it in terms of the slice of life stories about communities and Americans that you don't typically see on network TV. And it's a symptom of how Hollywood is changing and what's going to happen probably over the next 10 years as networks lose viewers every single month as people cut their cable subscriptions. So,
well, again, you did some trailblazing with Sunnyside. That's amazing. And I've had a lot of conversations with documentarians about the decolonialization of documentary filmmaking, and I feel like what you're doing, and maybe it's good you don't go to politics. You just keep doing what you're doing, and keep chipping away at the institutionalized racism in Hollywood, and it's going to take time.
Yeah.
And so, you talked about Miranire in your book.
Yeah.
You talk about Mississippi Masala, and like when Namesake, you read the book. And
Oh, thank you.
that was like a holy grail project for you at
Absolutely,
the time.
yes.
Right? So what is your holy grail project today at this stage in your career?
That's such an interesting question. So the Namesake was definitely it for a number of reasons. Mississippi Masala was the first film I saw when I was a kid that had brown people who looked like us. Mira and I directed that. John Cho, who plays Harold in the Harold and Kumar movies, he's an avid reader as well, and he was horrified. I think when we were making Harold and Kumar Escape from Guantanamo Bay, he mentioned Jhumpa Lahiri, and he's like, "What'd you think of Interpretive Melodies?" And I was like, "What's that?" And he was very disappointed in me. Gifted me the book, and I devoured it over a weekend. Was like, "Yo, this is amazing." We both read The Namesake together, and tried to get the rights to it actually to turn it into a film, and found out that Mira had already done that. So began a very aggressive lobbying campaign to get to audition for that movie. So it was special to me for a number of reasons, including all the touch points for my career up until that point. I would love to create or even be part of a successful comedy or dramedy on streaming that is also diverse, but the humor of which is driven sort of like the Harold and Kumar movies, or like what our mission was with Sunnyside, with something that just makes audiences laugh. I mean, the Harold and Kumar was perhaps a little bit before its time in terms of this model, but people didn't think that movie was going to do well because it had two Asian American men as the leads, and it was a big risk. The only reason it got greenlit is you had two junior executives at New Line Cinema who were allowed, I think they were allowed one greenlight a year, and they loved the script so much they did it. And it tanked at the box office when it first came out. The marketing campaign was awful. Nobody knew what to do with it, and it lasted whatever the bare minimum, like the 6 days before most theaters pulled it. And fans found it when it ended up on HBO and when the DVD came out, and they bought it and they had watch parties, and it 100% was not just brown and yellow people on the coasts who were buying this movie. It was like frat boys in Oklahoma, and it was like PhD students, in Evanston. Like, it was wild to see who was consuming this film, and they were doing it for all different reasons. So of course the fact that we saw ourselves, the Asian American community, was very supportive, but like the frat boys just wanted to laugh because it was a movie about friendship. And I love that feeling of, especially as polarized as things are in our country right now, that feeling of bringing people together through comedy. I remember running into, I won't name him since I don't have permission, but one of President Bush's senior advisors. This is before my White House days. But I was invited to some event in D.C., and he happened to be there. And he said, "Oh, shit, you're the guy from that Guantanamo Bay movie." And I was like, "Oh, no, this could go in so many different directions right now." And he said, "You're hilarious." And I said, "Oh, no way." And then, of course, I was like, "I've made you smile?" I said, "You weren't offended at Harold and Kumar Escape from Guantanamo Bay?" And he said, "No, all of us actually love it. It made the rounds in the Bush White House. Were we supposed to be offended?" And I said, "No. In fact, we went to great lengths to make sure that it is obviously a satire, but it's a satire based in making everybody laugh, and it's a satire of what exists and this bizarre world that our characters go through. It's not meant to be a slam on anybody." And that was the biggest validation that we had perhaps succeeded in that. And I've ever since that second movie, especially because it bumped up right on the Obama campaign stuff. Obama events, like when I would do events for college students, nobody would ever, not nobody, but rarely would people ask about the movies. It was always, going back to the People magazines of the world, it was always like some clickbaity, like, pseudo-journalist who would ask, like, "So who would Kumar vote for? Is Kumar voting for Obama?" And I was like, let me tell you something. I hate to say it, but, like, first of all, he's probably not registered to vote. And if he was, he would 100% vote for Ron Paul. Like, there's just no middle ground there. And people were so disappointed by that answer. But the point is, like, I would love to do something like that again in the comedy space. And I think streaming is probably the place that that I'd love to do it. I talk about this in the Sunnyside chapter, where I think that the naivete that I had in wanting to sell a show to networks is that network is no longer the place where you can change hearts and minds. Even though you're theoretically entering people's living rooms for free, nobody really watches TV, unless you're above a certain age. Nobody really watches live television. The way that you're reaching people and changing hearts and minds or bringing people on a journey is through the streamers. So that's what I'd love to do for the next project.
And a lot more freedom.
A lot more freedom for sure.
Creative freedom.
Yeah.
So after you complete this victory lap of this book tour, what are your next projects?
So I'd love to sell the book rights, and maybe like Dev Patel or somebody can play the younger me, because I'm too old now. He's amazing. I mean, there's no shortage of brown creatives now. We were talking about this backstage. It's Diwali this week. Happy Diwali.
Yeah, happy Diwali.
Celebrate. And I was telling you that I was remembering one of the first Diwalis when I moved to LA. There's a wonderful actor named Purva Bedi who I think is New York based now, and she called me up. This must have been like the early 2000s. She was like, "Hey, it's Diwali." I said, "I know, happy Diwali." She's like, we should go out to dinner. We should do something to celebrate. So the two of us went. We both lived in LA at the time. We both went to like some sad Indian restaurant on Melrose. We're the only ones there. The uncle was excited that somebody came in. He's like, "Happy Diwali," and we had like a little food, like one glass of wine. It didn't feel sad in the moment by any means, but this week, we had a couple book tour stops in LA, and you have like massive gatherings. Priyanka Chopra and Nick Jonas hosting a massive holiday Diwali bash at their place, or Lily Singh, or people who like housefuls of brown creatives, and these are all like very beautiful secular celebratory things that I'm like, I never, sitting there in that janky restaurant on Melrose not that long ago, I don't think I ever would have thought that there would be this many people to fill houses and houses to celebrate a holiday like Diwali. So that was like very heartwarming. I don't know how I got off on the stand. Oh, the next project's right. The joke about who would play the younger version of me. There's no shortage of them now.
I forgot the question as well. It's such a beautiful thing, man.
We're really, by the way, we're not straying too far from like people's expectations of like the two of us as like, oh, the stoners who are doing a Q&A, or like, how's that going to turn out? Wait, what were we just talking about? But I'm doing a horror movie later this month. It's shooting in New York. I'm developing a couple of TV projects that hopefully get picked up, and then the book stuff goes for the next couple of months as well. So I'm very excited about that, and I just have to say I'm so thankful for all of the beautiful, positive responses to people who've read the book so far and are curious about reading it. I did do the audiobook as well, so those of you who are not would prefer to listen to it, you can get it that way.
I went back and forth. I was reading, and then I had to do like a 2-hour drive to switch to audiobook. I went back to reading again. So, I have one last question. I think it's probably the most, serious and important question I'm going to ask today, which is Cardi B going to officiate your wedding?
I mean, I hope so. This was very surprising to me.
And can we all get invitations if that happens?
Absolutely. I mean, also it's so funny. It was like I was on a flight from New York to LA, and it's like early in the morning, and I noticed Cardi B was on the flight. I was like, oh, I want to say what's up to Cardi B, and I'm like, how do I do this? I don't know her. And I look at my backpack, I'm like, I'm the idiot who didn't even bring his own book on the plane with him when he's on a book tour, because that would have been a cool in. And then I was like, no, don't be that guy. I was, oh, I got a book coming out, Cardi B. So I was way in my head about any of this. And then finally, I doze off. I didn't say hi to her because there's a little do not disturb light now on some airplanes. So I'm like, oh, she has her do not disturb light on. I don't want to disturb Cardi B. I want to be respectful. I fall asleep, have this dream that like she officiates our wedding on the plane itself, with her incredible nails, like pointing to things, and that we, the three of us, walk out of LAX holding hands. And so I tweeted this, and I didn't tag her, because again, same thing as like being self-conscious about giving her the book. I was like, this is like a fun dream. And that night, I guess she tweeted at me. She retweeted my tweet and said, first of all, why didn't you say hi? And second of all, you know I'm licensed to perform, to officiate weddings. So I was like, oh shit. Like, and I saw this in bed, like Josh is already asleep. And I'm like, I need to reply to her. I'm like, do I wake him up and be like, yo, like Cardi B will officiate our wedding? And he truly, like my parents and my brother, just hates any attention. So it's been a tough week as well because, you know, most people have been very respectful, but some have not been. And so I was like, well, no, I don't want to bother him. I'm just going to reply to the tweet because obviously he's going to say yes. So I reply to the tweet and I was like, holy shit.
Obviously? Question mark?
I mean, this was about me, okay? I replied to her and I was like, holy shit, you're amazing. I mean, super down if you're serious. And I put my phone away and I went to sleep. And I woke up to like 800 push notifications. And the first one I read was from my buddy DLC, who is a character throughout the book, one of my best friends from college. Him and my buddy Song, and they both said, dude, Cardi B is super down. And then I look at like, what are all these other links? And it's like the Daily Mail and like a bunch of other, it's like Cardi B agrees to officiate Kal Penn's wedding. And I'm like, I'm getting ready for our press day, and I grabbed coffee. I had a couple of interviews that were lined up, and like people started asking about it. And I see Josh is waking up, and I'm like, hey, are you awake? I need to talk to you about something. Don't look at your phone yet. Please don't look at your phone. I need to just tell you. So he's like, what happened? What more could have possibly been a violation of my privacy that you need to tell me about? And I was like, well, Cardi B agreed. She saw my tweet. And she agreed to officiate our wedding. And he was like, that's cool.
Thank God.
So, the answer is, we've actually been engaged for like 2 years. And we don't know, but because of COVID, we haven't put any real wedding plans on. But I mean, I am for real. It'd be amazing if she officiated our wedding. I think the real question here is actually to your earlier conversation about the aunties and uncles, which is like, I know that inevitably the conversation will be Akorncha Cardi B, and the uncles and the aunties are going to be like, I will YouTube her songs. With all the heart in the world, they will say, what songs does she sing? I would like to listen to her songs. And I'm excited about that.
You got the aunties and uncles on board, finally. Yeah. Well done. Well, I had a bunch of questions that we're going to get into, Afghanistan, the U.S. pullout, and Guantanamo Bay, but I think this is maybe a better and lighter place to leave this conversation.
Okay. You're probably way better suited to answer those anyway, having been there on the ground numerous times.
But you were in the White House, and you were leaving the White House in 2011 as the surge was happening, which many people have pointed out was, arguably the best time for U.S. to pull out at that time, and instead the U.S. it was a surge, and I'm not sure where I feel like I read in the book somewhere that you didn't agree with that or not. Maybe I made that up. But I'm wondering what it was like for you to watch this fucking shit show transpire a few months ago.
Yeah.
And how you felt, because you were so close to it as the surge was being planned.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are two parts to this. I think there's when you're working in the public engagement office. Of course, you've, like every other staffer, you've taken an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, and you take your job very seriously. And a lot of things that you do in the meetings you have and the conversations you're having are outside of your own personal views. I'm fairly far to the left of the president I worked for on a number of issues, including Israel-Palestine, including things that were happening in Afghanistan. Drones. A number of things. But so there's the part of your job that's your job, and then there's the part that's years later after. I don't think any administration managed something like that as well as maybe we all ideally thought they would. So I was heartbroken, of course, a couple of months ago, seeing how mismanaged everything was in terms of the pullout. I think everyone was. It was sad, and we've talked about this backstage. I'm curious when you and your team go again. I know you still have people there. Those are the stories that I think are so critical when we have a certain amount of whether it's hope that we would do the right thing, or whether it's arrogance that we will do the right thing. I think there are so many lessons to be learned from that I hope we learn.
Yeah, I mean, it's the situation is just devolving right now.
Yeah.
It's getting worse and worse. It's going to get much worse before it gets better, and I don't know when that's going to be or how that's going to be. So, yeah. Well, on that light note, what else should we talk about? We've gone over, like, I think by 20 minutes at this point. That's why I was like, are we supposed to wrap up, or can we just, like, hang out, you know?
Well, can I ask you, yeah, I mean, what are we on? Nobody's waving at us. They said they were going to wave white cards. Oh. I thought you were going to be, like, out here waving white cards. I thought we still had 10 minutes.
Be like, hey, guys,
sorry.
you're done.
Yeah. Do we need to stop? There's so many. Huh? One last question.
You know, I was really disappointed that we couldn't do a Q&A with the audience.
Same, yeah.
Let's go rogue.
Okay.
All right. So I can't really see. You got a question. You're going to have to shout. We're not allowed to give the microphones.
Oh man, what an interesting question. I am not biracial, so I don't know how to answer that question. Well, the movie itself was in. I mean, the reasons I loved it actually were different from just the identity politics. Of course, Gogol and I, the character I played, or Nick Hill, we have a lot of similarities in terms of our parents' immigration experience and everything that went into our lives. But the reason I gravitated so strongly to the book was that Jumpa's writing resonated with me in a way that that something like Salinger's writing in The Catcher in the Rye resonated with me when I was 15. And I knew that I would never, I mean, Salinger doesn't license any of, or their state doesn't license any of their stuff, but I knew that I would never get a chance to play a boarding school kid from New England. But in reading that book, and it's all written in first person, I really felt like I was Holden Caulfield. And there is a Holden Caulfield runner in the book, I guess. I forgot about that strip club story.
So many good stories.
It's all true.
You got played, by the way.
I totally got played. Yeah, of course. You probably knew from the beginning. Like,
no, I didn't. I was
okay.
Yeah, right. Sonny was Desi as far as I knew.
He was Desi. The reason that the namesake was such a special project was because of all of the other independent character traits that Gogol had that I never had the chance to work on before. So to me, and it's similar to what we did, I think, in Sunnyside and some of the Harold and Kumar movies, where you can touch on identity and it doesn't have to necessarily be a driver for the project. In fact, I think John Cho, and I certainly share the sentiment that when you get a character description and the first thing it says is, he's an Indian guy who, I'm like, all right, so you're not writing for who the character is, you're writing for the externality of what you think you need to say. That's probably not going to be very interesting. So that's always a big red flag when I read something, and the namesake obviously wasn't that. So I know that didn't entirely answer your question, but it's one of the things that I love about stories like that. No, you, but then you have to put your mask back on.
Yeah, could you talk about the other Indian actors and actresses that you're friends with? What do you do when you meet up? What kind of conversation?
It's like a brown mafia.
Yeah.
Plotting their revenge against Hollywood.
Thank you for that question. I have so much respect for the sheer numbers of all the brown actors who are out there, but then also how their paths are so different, right? Like, you have people who, there are plenty of actors who, I write about in the book, I made the decision to take certain stereotypical roles, and I thought that those were the sacrifices that I wanted to make to build up my resume. And there are plenty of working actors who didn't have that experience and who said no to stuff and still, persevered in a lot of different ways. So one of the things I'm so appreciative of is that none of us have the same path to how we started working, and there are, of course, now 2 generations below who have come up. I mean, I thankfully saw so many of them for these Diwali gatherings, and it just made me feel so happy. We didn't even talk about brown shit. Like, it's just like you're seeing people, you're in this space. It's so nice to just be around other creative people, especially growing up in the generation where it was like, why aren't you being a doctor? It's really nice to be in a room of people who are like you in that sense.
Let's see, let's take one more question. This gentleman right here with the blue mask, yeah. Please stand up.
Huge fan for so long, and I was just trying to go back to like your career. The first movie that I saw, which was Ajay and American Daisy, and you go back to all those years, and it's just like, what do you remember at that time of just like what you thought your career was going to become at that point? And now, so many years later, like 20, 30 years later, what do you look back at that and say, man, I had it then, and I have it now?
He's asking about a movie called American Daisy, which was one of the first movies that I did, to your point, way back in the day. I was still in college at the time, so it's an interesting question. My goal when I wanted to be an actor was I wanted to be a working actor. That meant that I wanted to be able to pay my rent from acting. That was it. I didn't think of anything else that might come along with it. So I certainly was like, I'm not doing it because I want to be like, I want to see my name on anything, or I want to be in magazines or anything like that. I just want to be able to tell really cool, compelling stories that make people smile, bring people together, take the audience into worlds that they haven't been before. So that movie, American Daisy, I think I had to take, no, we shot it over the summer, so I didn't have to take time off of school. It was the first time that there were, to your earliest question about like other people who were working at the time, that's a cast full of brown actors. We know some of them by name, others you don't necessarily, like, and people like Ranbir Lahiri, who is a fantastic musician and an actor, Rizwan Manji, who's crushed it in television since, but that was one of his first projects too. It was a really great experience to work with them. That movie we shot in all practical locations. I don't even think there was a lighting team. It was one handheld camera. And it came out, it was only really a community movie. I think it made a few $100,000 over the course of its run. So when I look back at that, I credit a lot of those filmmakers with providing an opportunity, in a sense that we weren't the only ones who were trying to be actors. But I feel incredibly blessed. Namely, to your point, like the community really came out to support those movies, and they supported the Harold and Kumar movies, and they've really had our backs through a lot of that, and I'm very appreciative of it.
When you talk about how you want to bring joy and make people laugh, I mean, that was the first, that was awesome.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, well, look, I want to thank you again for writing this incredible book. I highly recommend it, and also I haven't read a book in a long time. I don't know if it was the pandemic, like my attention span, I just like read short articles. So you brought me back to reading again.
Right on.
But the book is fantastic. I highly recommend it. Everyone, please get it. You will not be disappointed.
Well, thank you. I want to thank you for flying all the way out here and doing this. I am a huge fan of you and your work over years.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Incredible. The perspectives and the voices that you've given folks through the platform and through your work is incredible. I want to thank everybody for getting vaccinated, coming out today, and getting the book. I hope you enjoy it. Hope you share it with your friends, and thank you for all the love and support. I really appreciate it. So, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.